Howdy, it's a few years now, I think, since I last tested a super zoom lens. Let's fix that with a review of the Tamron 18 to 300mm f3.5 to 6.3 III-A VC VXD. Gah, Tamron haven't lost their love of huge lens names. This 16x zoom lens is currently only available for Sony's mirrorless E-mount cameras, where it offers an aps-c image circle, and also it's available on Fuji X mount, which is exciting for Fuji users. It's about time Tamron started showing the Fuji community some attention. At $700 or £680 here in the UK, it's a little on the expensive side, but many people whose purchasing decisions are focused on zoom range and convenience will still be very tempted. Here is that zoom range. There are only a couple of other lenses available in this class that give you any more zoom range than 18 to 300mm, and both of those are made by Tamron too, therefore digital SLR cameras instead though. With this lens, there are the usual disadvantages of having such a zoom range. Firstly, possible image quality issues, which we'll look at in a minute, and secondly, a dark maximum aperture, f3.5 at the widest angle, quickly darkening to a very dark f6.3 as you zoom in. That means you won't be able to get very fast shutter speeds here, making it harder to shoot in low light situations, and also it's hard to get particularly out of focus backgrounds with a lens like this. Something that will help you get sharper pictures though is this lens's built-in image stabilization, which Tamron call VC. The fact that it's built into the lens is great and means that your image can be stabilized no matter what camera you're shooting with. Here's some footage with it turned off and now turned on. As you can see, the resulting image is not rock steady, but it's certainly better than before, which is helpful for video work. Let's take a look at its build quality then. Its fit and finish are typical for a modern Tamron lens. It's made of plastic, but feels solid enough, and it has a nice feeling brushed finish to it. At 620 grams, it has a little weight to it, and will feel better balanced on a larger camera. Tamron claim that it's fairly well weather sealed, and it certainly has a nice sealing gasket around the rear lens mount. Towards the back, we have the focus ring. It's made of plastic, but it turns quite smoothly and works very responsively with the lens's focus motor. Here you can see some good news. When zoomed in, the lens doesn't exhibit any noticeable focus breathing. However, zoom out and some breathing is noticeable, albeit nothing too alarming. When shooting in AFS mode on your Sony camera, the lens's autofocus speed is only average. It's slightly slower actually, but if you change over to shooting in autofocus continuous mode, then it will work much faster for you. It works silently too, and accurately, unless you're shooting in a very dark situation where it trips up a little bit. Next comes the lens's zoom ring. It doesn't really turn very smoothly, in fact it's a bit stiff. My guess is that Tamron wanted to avoid its zoom creeping and perhaps overcompensated here a little. The lens comes with a plastic hood and its filter size is 67mm wide, a size that Tamron are trying to make the standard for as many of their lenses as possible. Overall, the build quality here is perfectly fine. It's a little plasticky but solid enough, and the electronics all function perfectly well. Let's move on now and look at image quality, which is where most super zoom lenses tend to struggle a bit. I'm testing it here on a Sony a5100 with its 24 megapixel aps-c sensor. In-camera corrections are turned on. At 18mm and f3.5, we right away see excellent sharpness and contrast in the middle of your images. The corners, however, look noticeably soft. You can stop down to f5.6 or f8 if you like, but you won't see any improvements there. And as usual, stop down to f11 or f16 for the effects of diffraction to cause more softness. That happens throughout the zoom range. Let's zoom in a little to 50mm. The maximum aperture has now darkened to f4.5. In the middle of the image, again, we are seeing excellent sharpness. The good news is that corner image quality looks much better than it did at 18mm, nice and sharp, straight from the maximum aperture. Stop down to f5.6 for pretty much perfect image quality in those corners. That is as sharp as they get at 50mm. Let's zoom in even more now to 140mm, where the maximum aperture has darkened again to f5.6. Image quality in the middle is very sharp, although not as sharp as it was at wider angles. Corner image quality is beginning to soften again. If you stop down to f8 or f11, you won't see any real improvements. Finally, let's zoom all the way into 300mm. At the new maximum aperture of f6.3, image quality in the middle is a little soft, with slightly lower contrast. Corner image quality here is looking much worse again now. Stop down to f8, and there's no real improvement in the corners or back in the middle, frankly. A decent amount of detail is being captured here, but the lens is hardly sharp at 300mm. Overall, well, it's really quite an average performance for a super zoom lens here. Actually, image quality in the middle of the zoom range is fairly nice, but zooming all the way out to 18mm will yield soft image corners, and pretty much everything at 300mm is looking a bit hazy. Okay, let's turn off those in-camera corrections now and take a look at vignetting and distortion. At 18mm, we see quite strong bevel distortion, although I've seen worse than this before on a zoom lens for mirrorless cameras. Corners are fairly dark at f3.5, but stop down to f5.6 and they quickly brighten up. Zoom in to about 30mm and that distortion straightens out. Zoom in beyond 30mm and we see some very mild pincushion distortion, not as bad as I was expecting here though. At f6.3 the corners look fairly dark, but stop down to f8 or f11 and they do begin to brighten up. Overall though, I'd actually say this is a better than average performance for vignetting and distortion on a super zoom lens. Now then, let's make things interesting and look at close-up image quality. You have two options here. Zoom in to 300mm and you can focus as closely as 1 meter from your subject, which is excellent for getting pictures of smaller objects. At f6.3, close-up image quality is slightly soft, but with some quite strong purple fringing on contrasting edges. Stop down to f8 for a tiny improvement, but at f11, close-up image quality looks much sharper and cleaner. Your second option for close-up shooting is to zoom out to 18mm, where the minimum focus distance from your camera's sensor shortens to 10cm, which is actually within the front element of the lens itself, which is of course insane. Here are some shots for you taken a little past that minimum focus distance for the sake of practicality and in order just to get some light onto my subject. At f3.5 we see good close-up sharpness here, albeit with a little colour fringing. Stop down to f5.6 for a touch more sharpness and contrast. Now let's see how well the lens works against bright lights. At wider angles, some flaring is visible here, but it's minimal and contrast remains very good. Zoom in and, well, there's still no real problems here, so that's a great show. And finally, let's take a look at the quality of this lens's bokeh. This lens will not be your first choice for getting pictures with out-of-focus backgrounds, but zoom in enough and you can still get some good results. The quality of this lens's bokeh is generally on the nervous side, but nothing seriously ugly is going on, and deeply out-of-focus backgrounds will look very smooth. Overall then, I was hardly blown away with the Tamron 18-300, but realistically, there's only so much you can ask of a lens with such a zoom range. It works perfectly fine, good build quality, image stabilization and autofocus, and the image quality is alright. In fact, it's quite sharp in the middle of the zoom range. I was definitely left wanting more at 300mm though, and a bit more corner sharpness at the widest angles too. That's just a super zoom lens for you though. Overall, it is a fun optic to use, and I can just about recommend it if this is what you're on the market for, but more demanding photographers should bear in mind its limitations before taking the plunge. The nice thing about a super zoom lens is that it has something for everyone, well, almost, and there's something for almost everyone over on my Patreon page too. If you find these review videos helpful, then check it out in the description below. Supporters of this channel get all kinds of bonus content that I really enjoy putting together.